Washington Post reporter Ed O'Keefe joins us now from Washington, D.C. Good to see you, Ed.
Good to see you guys.
So what do you make of the feud between the leader of the GOP and Donald Trump? Is this unprecedented in your experience?
The fight between a candidate and the political party? Yes, at least in modern times. We don't normally see the chairman of the party telling one of his candidates to hush up and get in line. But look, the Trump campaign can continue to make these accusations, but the bottom line is if you go onto the ground, if you talk to people who are organizing these things, very simply they say, there may be Trump supporters out here who want him to become our nominee and become the president, but his campaign isn't out here organizing them in any real big way to get them elected into delegate slots and get them to Cleveland to vote for him. I was in Colorado, this place that he keeps complaining about, last weekend. There were supporters of his who were out in the halls at this arena in Colorado Springs who told me they had been involved in politics for less than 3 months. And part of the reason they got off their couches to go do this is because they realized that the Trump campaign hadn't sent anyone to Colorado to organize them to get them elected to become delegates to the convention in Cleveland. Ditto in South Carolina, in Indiana, in Virginia, in all sorts of other states where delegates are getting selected. He's going to get creamed again this weekend in Wyoming, where his campaign concedes they again didn't do the work necessary to get delegates elected on his behalf. As the Cruz campaign put it to me earlier today, when he's not winning, he's whining. And he shouldn't be doing that because rules are rules. They've been in place, and he just hasn't been following them.
I know, but in messaging here, I think it's kind of interesting because a lot of his supporters don't like rules, quite honestly.
Sure.
They don't like the establishment. So what do you think the Trump campaign message is here as he maybe does start to realize he doesn't have enough delegates to clinch the nomination?
He makes a good point that you have to understand these rules in order to play the game, and the rules are complex. But just like in any sport, you have to understand the rules. You learn them if you want to go play that sport. And I'm not saying politics is sport, but you get the idea that when rules are in place, they have to be followed. I totally understand the sentiment of someone who was only brought into this process perhaps in the last few months, inspired by Trump, and realizes that the rules have been there and they're not necessarily going to be eligible to participate to the extent that they would like, and that potentially Mr. Trump comes up short because he hasn't been following those procedures over the past few months. But if that's the case, then they can be rewritten. Remember, the rules of the Cleveland Convention have not actually been officially written. The rules that everyone are talking about right now are the ones that were written in 2012 for the convention in Tampa. The Friday before the Monday that they meet in Cleveland, there will be a meeting of what's called the Convention Rules Committee, and they will set the rules for what happens during the nomination votes the following week. If Trump wants to change them, that's his avenue to change them, and the campaign presumably would be focused on making sure that their supporters get seats on that committee. It gets a little down in the weeds, but that's where they can still potentially make a play to change things to come out more favorably for Mr. Trump.
Ed, I wonder, it's interesting. We've been asking a lot of questions today of Trump's people. We spoke to Katrina Pearson this morning about Mr. Trump's tactic of saying that the process is rigged and it's crooked. And I wonder if perhaps this is something that he is doing to play to his supporters in anticipation of what will happen come convention time. If you hammer home enough that message, Mr. Trump does, to his supporters that the system, and it doesn't have to be just Colorado, they don't hear just necessarily Colorado, they hear the system is rigged against their candidate. Is that a way to fire up that base?
Absolutely. It'll keep him motivated. Remember, he's still got votes to be held in New York, in Maryland, New Jersey, Montana, New Mexico, big one in California. He's got to keep those people who haven't voted yet motivated to show up for him, despite word that perhaps he may come up short in Cleveland and they haven't voted yet. Similarly, he's got to make sure that his supporters in the states that have seated their delegates put pressure on those delegates and call them and email them and say, hey, don't forget, Mr. Trump won this state, you should be representing the will of the people. So yes, it's all part of a campaign designed both through the media and through social media to make sure that momentum sticks. And look, it's still his race to lose. He has the most delegates. He's leading in the polls. There's a new poll out this afternoon in Maryland that gives him a commanding lead, which we'll vote later this month. He's leading in Pennsylvania. If he does well in all those states and hits 1,237 delegates, all this is moot. But if he doesn't, he's got to keep doing what he's doing.
Something I think a lot of people watching, though, speculation that top Republicans may skip the GOP convention in July. My husband and I were talking about this. What impact would that have on the party?
Not much, because if they don't officially have a seat at the convention to be a voting delegate, they don't necessarily need to be there. They might give a speech at like 3:30 on the Wednesday, and C-SPAN 2 will air it, or maybe you guys will air it, depending on your coverage. But beyond that, there's no real need for them to be there. This has happened in the past at both conventions. If you're running in 2008, for example, and President Obama was unpopular in your state, you skipped the convention. You stayed home. You avoided being seen with all the members of your party and the president at the convention. Ditto in 2004 when George W. Bush was an unpopular president. You don't go to the convention where he's going to get renominated. You stay home, you focus on local issues, and you get elected. It looks like that's what will happen in this case. There are several senators and Senate candidates who will avoid this in order to keep their numbers up. And then a lot of the losers, the guy that didn't win, probably won't show up either because, again, unless they're a delegate, there's really no need for them to be there other than to be there to soak up the experience.
Ed O'Keefe from the Washington Post. Thanks for joining us, Ed. And by the way, don't you know CBSN? We're always on.
Yeah, always on.
We'll be covering that.